I'm Olivia, 34, female. I live in a small but cozy apartment in the city, a place I've filled with plants and books to make it feel like home. For the past decade, I've worked as a freelance graphic designer, a job that once provided a comfortable, creative life. But the truth is, my family's betrayal didn't start when they left for a tropical vacation without me. It started long ago, hidden in the pages of a will I never knew existed. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For 15 years, I was the hub of my family's universe. It wasn't a role I asked for, but one I inherited after my grandmother passed away. She had been the glue, the one who insisted on traditions, and when she was gone, that responsibility fell onto my shoulders. I was 24, just starting my career, but I embraced it. My apartment, though modest, became the official headquarters for every holiday. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, you name it. I loved it, or at least I told myself I did. I loved the chaos, the scent of a roasting turkey, the sight of my mother, Eleanor, fussing over the placement of forks, and my older sister, Isabel, directing guests with the efficiency of a seasoned general. I saw these gatherings as the physical manifestation of our family's love, a love I was willing to orchestrate and, more importantly, finance. The costs were never small. I'd spend weeks planning menus, saving up for premium ingredients, and buying thoughtful gifts. In my more successful years as a freelancer, it was manageable. I had a few big clients that kept me flush, and I never thought twice about dropping hundreds of dollars on a single meal to see my family happy. They seemed to appreciate it. "Oh, Olivia, you've outdone yourself again," my mother would exclaim, patting my hand while her eyes scanned the table for any imperfections. Isabel would offer a tight, complimentary smile and say, "It's good. The caterer you used last year was slightly better with the potatoes, but this is good." She never believed I cooked it all myself, which I found both insulting and perversely flattering. The shift began subtly. The freelance market, once a reliable ocean of opportunity, started to feel like a shrinking pond. A major client of mine downsized and cut their marketing budget to the bone, which meant my retainer, my primary source of income, vanished overnight. I scrambled to find new work, but the industry had changed. AI-generated logos and cheap overseas designers were flooding the market. I was still good, but I was no longer a bargain. My income dropped by nearly 60% in less than a year. Panic became a constant, unwelcome roommate. I started cutting back on everything: subscriptions, nights out, new clothes. The one thing I tried desperately to hold on to was the holidays. Thanksgiving was the first real crack in the facade. I tried to do it on a shoestring budget. The premium, free-range turkey was replaced by a frozen one from the supermarket. The artisanal bread became store-brand dinner rolls. I asked everyone to bring a side dish for the first time ever, framing it as a fun, potluck-style event. The phone call with Isabel was illuminating. "A potluck?" she'd asked, her voice dripping with a sort of amused disdain. "Livy, that's what college students do." "Is everything okay?" I swallowed my pride, which tasted a lot like acid, and forced a cheerful tone. "Everything's great, I just thought it would be fun to mix things up, have everyone contribute." She wasn't convinced. "If you're short on cash, you can just say so. I could float you a couple hundred." The offer sounded kind, but it was a power play. Accepting her money would mean admitting defeat. It would shift the family's power dynamic, and I wasn't ready to surrender my role as the generous host. "No, really, it's fine," I insisted. "Just bring your famous green bean casserole." The day itself was strained. My mother walked in and immediately noticed the difference. "Oh, store-bought cranberry sauce this year," she noted, not unkindly, but with an air of clinical observation. Isabel arrived with her casserole in a designer dish carrier and a bottle of wine that cost more than my entire grocery bill. She surveyed the scene, her eyes lingering on the slightly too small turkey, and gave me a look that was pure pity. The carefully constructed image of myself as the effortless, successful family anchor was crumbling, and it was humiliating. The breaking point came in early December. Christmas was approaching, and the thought of hosting filled me with a cold dread. My savings were depleted, and I had just enough to cover my January rent. There was no way I could afford a tree, let alone gifts and a feast for a dozen people. I decided to be an adult about it. I called a family meeting via group text, which felt deeply impersonal for such a significant announcement. I proposed an alternative. Instead of our usual big gathering at my place, we could all go out to a restaurant for Christmas Eve dinner. Everyone could pay for their own meal, and it would take the pressure off. I thought it was a fair, modern solution. The silence on the group chat was deafening. An hour later, my mother called. "Olivia, honey," she began, her voice syrupy with concern. "A restaurant on Christmas Eve? It's just not the same. It's so impersonal. What about the traditions?" "Mom, I can't afford it this year," I confessed, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "My work has been really slow, and I just don't have the funds for it." There was a pause. I expected empathy, an offer to help, maybe even a suggestion that she and Isabel could co-host. Instead, she sighed. "Well, I suppose we'll have to figure something else out then. It's just such a shame. Your grandfather always loved Christmas at your place." She was laying the guilt on thick, tying my financial failure to a betrayal of our sainted grandfather, who had passed away 10 years ago. Isabel called next. Her tone was brisk, all business. "Okay, so Christmas is canceled. Got it," she said. "No, it's not canceled," I argued, my voice rising in frustration. "I suggested we go to a restaurant." "Right, a restaurant," she scoffed. "Look, Livy, don't worry about it. Mom and I will handle it. We'll figure something out for Christmas." The conversation ended there. There was no invitation, no discussion of what figuring something out meant. It felt less like they were taking the burden off my shoulders and more like they were revoking my privileges. I was no longer the queen of holidays. I was just the younger sister who couldn't pay her way. The silence that followed was worse than the arguments. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. Christmas was approaching, and I had no idea what, if any, plans were being made. I felt like I was being punished for being poor, and the loneliness was a physical ache in my chest. The 2 weeks leading up to Christmas were some of the longest of my life. My apartment, usually a hive of activity with recipe testing and decoration planning, was silent and still. I didn't even buy a tree. What was the point? I tried calling my mother a few times, but she was always busy or about to run out the door. "Things are just so hectic, honey. You know how it is before the holidays," she'd say, her voice bright and breezy. Isabel didn't return my texts. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. It wasn't just that they were making other plans. It was that they were so clearly and deliberately excluding me from them. The message was clear. If I couldn't provide the service they were accustomed to, I was no longer a necessary part of the celebration. Christmas Eve arrived, a day that had always been my Super Bowl. This time, I spent it on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through streaming services and trying to ignore the festive lights twinkling in the windows across the street. My phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, not even a token Merry Christmas Eve message on the family group chat. It felt like I had ceased to exist. I went to bed early, hoping to sleep through the holiday and wake up on the 26th, when the world returned to normal. I woke up on Christmas morning to the jarring sound of a notification on my phone. For a fleeting, hopeful moment, I thought it might be my mom or sister finally reaching out. But it was a social media notification. A cousin had tagged Isabel in a photo. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened the app, and there it was, the something else they had figured out. The photo was of my entire family, my mother, Eleanor, my sister, Isabel, with her husband and 2 kids, my aunts, uncles, and cousins, all standing on a pristine white sand beach. They were all wearing matching festive Hawaiian shirts, sunglasses perched on their heads and beaming at the camera. In the background, a turquoise ocean stretched to the horizon, and a banner hanging from a palm tree read, "Merry Christmas from the Maldives." I stared at the image, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The Maldives. They had gone on an international 5-star vacation and hadn't said a single word to me. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was a physical blow, sharp and stunning. My fingers trembled as I clicked on Isabel's profile. Her page, usually a curated collection of her perfect life, was now an explosion of tropical holiday cheer. There was a photo of her and Mom getting pedicures, captioned, "Getting pampered with my favorite lady, Island Life Christmas Getaway." There was a video of my nephews opening a mountain of presents in a luxurious beachfront villa. There was a picture of the whole family clinking champagne glasses at a fancy dinner, the table laden with lobster and exotic fruits. The caption read, "It's a different kind of Christmas this year, but making memories with the ones who matter most is what it's all about. So grateful for my amazing family." The ones who matter most. The words twisted in my gut like a knife. I was not one of them. I scrolled obsessively, each post a fresh wave of pain. I saw my uncle, the one I'd helped move into his new apartment just 2 months ago, grinning as he rode a jet ski. I saw my aunt, who I dog-sat for every time she traveled, posing with a cocktail by an infinity pool. These were the people I had hosted, fed, and celebrated for years. The moment I could no longer provide that service, I was disposable. The sting of it was sharp, acidic. It wasn't just about the vacation, it was about the deception. The weeks of silence, the busy-sounding phone calls from my mother, Isabel's dismissive, "We'll handle it." It was all a lie, a smokescreen to hide their plans from me. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had actively concealed their joy from me, knowing it would hurt. I spent the rest of Christmas Day in a fog of disbelief and hurt. I turned off my phone, unable to bear the thought of another cheerful notification. The silence of my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was oppressive, a testament to my exclusion. The empty space where a Christmas tree should have been seemed to mock me. I thought about the thousands of dollars, the countless hours, the emotional energy I had poured into this family. I had sacrificed my own time and money, believing I was investing in love and connection. In reality, I had just been providing a service. I was the family's event planner and caterer, and when my business went under, I was unceremoniously fired. The days that followed were a blur. I barely ate. I ignored the work emails piling up in my inbox. The world felt gray and muted. On New Year's Eve, while the rest of the city celebrated, I sat by my window and watched the fireworks explode over the skyline, feeling utterly alone. My family returned a few days into the new year. My mom left a voicemail. "Hi, honey. We're back. Oh, it was just wonderful. You would have loved it. We missed you. Give me a call when you get a chance." The casual, breezy tone was almost more insulting than the exclusion itself. "We missed you." The lie was so blatant, so shameless, it made me sick. Did she really expect me to believe that? Did she think I was that stupid? Isabel sent a text. "Back in the cold. Hope you had a good Christmas." I stared at the message, a storm of emotions raging inside me. Anger, hurt, confusion. I wanted to scream at them, to demand an explanation, to make them understand the depth of their cruelty. But what was the point? What could they possibly say that would make it better? The truth was laid bare in their smiling, sun-kissed photos. My role in the family was conditional, and I had failed to meet the conditions. The illusion of our happy, close-knit family was shattered, and all I was left with were the sharp, glittering pieces of their betrayal. The first few weeks of January were a study in emotional survival. I operated on autopilot, functioning just enough to keep my life from completely imploding. I picked up a few small design projects, paid my bills, and politely ignored the cheerful voicemail from my mother and the casual text from my sister. I knew I couldn't avoid them forever, but I needed to build up some kind of armor before facing their manufactured innocence. The thought of hearing them recount their wonderful vacation, pretending they had missed me, was more than I could bear. My anger was a cold, hard stone in my chest, and my grief for the family I thought I had was a constant, dull ache. My relationship with my family had always been transactional, I just hadn't seen it until now. I provided the perfect holidays, and in return, I received a conditional form of love and inclusion. When I could no longer hold up my end of the bargain, the transaction was voided. The most painful part was realizing that my value to them wasn't in who I was, but in what I could provide. One dreary Tuesday afternoon, I was trying to find the motivation to work on a logo revision for a particularly picky client. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It was a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, assuming it was a spam call. But for some reason, I answered. "Is this Olivia?" a woman's voice asked. It was raspy, unfamiliar, but held a certain warmth. "Yes, this is she," I replied cautiously. "Olivia, you probably don't remember me. This is your Aunt Genevieve." The name sent a jolt through me. Aunt Genevieve, my grandfather's younger sister. I hadn't seen her in at least 15 years. She was the family's black sheep, a quiet, bookish woman who had a falling out with my mother and grandmother decades ago over something no one ever spoke about directly. The official story was that Genevieve was difficult and reclusive. She never came to holidays, not even when my grandfather was alive. I had only vague childhood memories of her, the scent of old paper and lavender, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, and a quiet, gentle smile. "Aunt Genevieve," I said, my voice filled with surprise. "Wow, it's been a very long time. How are you?" "I'm old, but I'm still kicking," she chuckled, the sound like rustling leaves. "Listen, dear, I know this is out of the blue. I'm not one for family drama, which is why I've kept my distance all these years. But I saw something that, well, it disturbed me. I'm on that social media thing. A friend from my book club insisted, and I saw the pictures your sister posted. From the Maldives." My stomach tightened. I said nothing. "I also noticed," she continued, her voice softening with empathy, "that you weren't in any of them. And knowing your mother and your sister as I do, I can guess why." A lump formed in my throat. To hear someone else acknowledge the cruelty, someone who wasn't obligated to take my side, was unexpectedly validating. It made me feel, for the first time in weeks, a little less crazy. "It's a long story," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm sure it is," she said gently. "They haven't changed a bit, always valued presentation over people. Your grandfather, my brother, he was different. He saw what they were. That's why he tried to protect you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I didn't understand. "Protect me? What do you mean?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if she was weighing her next words carefully. "Olivia, the reason I'm calling is not just to offer my sympathy, though you certainly have it. Something has been bothering me for a decade, and seeing them flaunt that vacation while leaving you behind, it was the last straw. I think it's time you knew the truth about your grandfather's will." My grandfather. He had been my hero. A kind, steady presence in my life, a man who taught me how to garden and how to stand up for myself. He passed away from a heart attack 10 years ago, and his loss was a wound that had never fully healed. I had been told he didn't have much to leave behind. His house was sold to cover his medical debts, and what little was left in his savings account was, according to my mother, split evenly between her and my uncle. I received a small sum, about $5,000, which I was told was a special gift he'd set aside for me. At the time, I was 24 and deeply grateful for it. "His will?" I asked, confused. Mom said it was all very straightforward. The house was sold, and the money was divided up. A dry, mirthless laugh came through the phone. "Oh, I'm sure that's what Alina told you. Straightforward for her, perhaps. Olivia, your grandfather was a very shrewd man. He didn't trust your mother with money, and he worried that Isabel's, well, her tendencies would leave you out in the cold one day. He saw it even back then. He knew you were the one with the good heart, the one who held everything together." My heart started to beat faster. "Aunt Genevieve, what are you trying to tell me?" "I'm telling you that your grandfather left you something significant. He made me the executor of his will, but your mother, she caused a lot of trouble. She produced a different, simpler will, one that she claimed was his final one, and managed to have it probated instead. She threatened to drag me through a nasty legal battle that I couldn't afford, physically or financially at the time. I was dealing with my own husband's illness, and I backed down. It's the greatest regret of my life." The room started to spin. A different will, executor, probated. The words sounded like they were from a movie, not my life. "He left me something," I whispered. "He left you his investment portfolio," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He had been quietly investing for over 40 years. He wasn't a millionaire, but he was comfortable. By my estimation at the time of his death, it was worth close to $500,000. He left a small portion to your mother and Isabel, but the bulk of it, the portfolio, was meant for you. It was your inheritance, your security. Your mother and sister stole it from you. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. $500,000. The number was so large, so abstract, it was meaningless. All I could feel was a roaring in my ears. The years of financial struggle, the sleepless nights worrying about rent, the humiliation of having to cancel Christmas, it all coalesced into a single, blinding flash of understanding. My life could have been different. My grandfather had tried to make it different, and my own mother, my own sister, had taken that from me. The family vacation wasn't just a petty exclusion. It was a victory lap, funded by the security and comfort that was rightfully mine. "Olivia, are you sent? Ill there?" Aunt Genevieve's voice was full of concern. "Yes," I breathed, clutching the edge of my desk to steady myself. "I'm here. What do we do?" "First," she said, a new, steely resolve in her tone, "you come and see me. I kept a copy of the original will. I kept everything." The drive to Aunt Genevieve's house felt surreal. She lived 3 hours away in a small, quiet town that time seemed to have forgotten. It was the same town my grandfather had lived in, a place I hadn't visited since his funeral. As I drove, my mind raced, replaying the phone call over and over. $500,000, an inheritance I never knew existed, a betrayal so deep and calculated it was hard to comprehend. It was one thing to be excluded from a vacation. It was another to realize that the people who were supposed to love you most had systematically robbed you of a future your grandfather had planned for you. My anger, which had been a cold stone for weeks, was now a white-hot fire. Every memory of my mother's feigned concern about my finances, every recollection of Isabel's condescending offers to float me some cash, was now cast in a sinister new light. They weren't just pitying me, they were mocking me. They were enjoying a life of comfort and luxury built on a foundation of lies, lies that had directly impoverished me. The expensive dinners, the designer handbags, Isabel's sprawling suburban house, my mother's frequent cruises, was it all funded by my inheritance? The thought made me physically ill. Aunt Genevieve lived in a small, tidy bungalow crammed with books. Books overflowed from shelves, were stacked on tables, and even sat in neat piles on the floor. The air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and brewing tea. She greeted me at the door with a warm, wrinkled smile and enveloped me in a hug that felt surprisingly strong. She was smaller than I remembered, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "I'm so glad you came," she said, leading me into a cozy living room. "Tea." We sat at her small kitchen table, a steaming mug warming my trembling hands. For a few minutes, she just let me breathe, understanding that I was in a state of shock. Then, she retrieved a worn, leather-bound folder from a locked cabinet in her study. She placed it on the table between us with a quiet reverence. "I was a librarian archivist for 40 years, she explained softly. "I know how to preserve documents, and I know how to keep records. Your mother always underestimated me. She thought I was just a timid bookworm, but bookworms know things. We know how to find the truth, and we know how to protect it." She opened the folder. Inside were dozens of documents, all perfectly preserved in plastic sleeves. The centerpiece was a thick, formal document bound with a blue ribbon. "This," she said, her finger tapping the cover page, "is your grandfather's true last will and testament, dated 6 months before he passed. I witnessed it, as did his lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, a good, honest man who has since passed away, unfortunately." My hands shook as I took it. I read the legal jargon, my eyes scanning for the key phrases. And there it was in black and white. A few specific bequests to charity, a modest sum of $20,000 each to his daughter, Eleanor, and his granddaughter, Isabel. And then, the rest of it. The entire section on his investment portfolio, with account numbers and brokerage details, was left to me, his granddaughter, Olivia. The will was clear, detailed, and signed by my grandfather in his familiar, steady hand. "He wanted you to be independent," Genevieve said, her voice thick with memory. "He saw how your mother and Isabel operated, how they always made everything about themselves. He used to say, "Livy has the kindest heart, Jen, but a kind heart doesn't pay the bills. I need to make sure she's safe." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the words on the page. It was a message from the past, a final act of love from the man I adored. And it had been intercepted, hidden away, for a decade. "So what happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "How did they get away with it?" Genevieve sighed, a sound heavy with years of regret. After the funeral, Eleanor confronted me. She knew I was the executor. She came to my house with another document, a much simpler, one-page will that left everything to her, to be distributed as she saw fit. It was dated 2 weeks before his death. She claimed he had a change of heart, wanted to keep things simple. I knew it was a forgery. "Your grandfather's signature was shaky, not his own, and he was sharp as a tack until the very end. He wouldn't have made such a drastic change without telling me." She pointed to another document in the folder, a photocopy of the fake will. I could see it immediately. The signature was close, but it lacked the confidence of the one on the real will. "I told her I would fight it," Genevieve continued. "But she was prepared, she said she." Declaim I was exercising undue influence over an old man. She threatened to drag my name through the mud, to paint me as a bitter, greedy spinster trying to steal from the family. At the time, my husband, Robert, was in the final stages of his illness. I was his full-time caregiver. I didn't have the money for a long legal battle, and I certainly didn't have the emotional strength. She knew that. She cornered me when I was at my weakest, so I did nothing. She filed her version of the will, it went through probate unopposed, and she took everything. She gave you that $5,000 as a token, a way to make herself feel better, I suppose. It was my greatest failure, Olivia. I let her bully me, and you paid the price. I reached across the table and placed my hand on hers. "You didn't fail," I said firmly. "You were in an impossible situation, but you saved the truth. You saved this." I gestured to the folder. We spent the rest of the afternoon poring over the documents. Genevieve had been meticulous. She had notes from her conversations with my grandfather, copies of his financial statements from that period, even a letter from his lawyer confirming his intentions. It was a treasure trove of evidence, a perfectly preserved narrative of a decade-old crime. As we worked, Genevieve told me stories about my grandfather, filling in the gaps of my childhood memories. She painted a picture of a man who was not only kind, but also incredibly perceptive. He saw the toxic dynamics of his own family and did his best to shield me from them. The will wasn't just about money, it was his attempt to give me freedom. Freedom from the transactional love of my mother and sister, freedom to build a life on my own terms. By the time evening fell, my shock had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice for my grandfather. It was about reclaiming the life he had wanted for me. My mother and sister hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had disrespected his final wish, his legacy of love. "What's your plan?" Genevieve asked, watching me. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but they're not going to get away with it. They took my future, and they celebrated on a beach with the profits. They think I'm weak. They think I'm the family doormat, the one who will just quietly accept whatever scraps they throw my way. They're about to find out how wrong they are." Genevieve smiled, a genuine, fierce smile. "Good," she said. "Your grandfather would be proud. Now let's have some dinner, you'll need your strength." Leaving Aunt Genevieve's house felt like leaving a military bunker. I was armed with information, evidence, and a purpose that burned brighter than my anger. The 3-hour drive back home wasn't filled with sorrow or shock anymore. It was a strategy session. My mind, accustomed to organizing design elements and project timelines, began to piece together the elements of a plan. Revenge, I decided, was a project, and I was going to be the lead designer. I couldn't just march in and accuse them. They would deny everything, lawyer up, and drag me through the same exhausting legal battle that had deterred Genevieve. They had a 10-year head start and had likely covered their tracks. A public accusation would just be my word against theirs, and they would paint me as a bitter, jealous daughter lashing out because I was left off a vacation list. No, the reveal had to be surgical. It had to be undeniable, public within our own family circle, and delivered with a calmness that would completely unnerve them. They expected tears and tantrums. I would give them cold, hard facts. My first call was to a lawyer. I spent a week researching probate and estate litigation attorneys, finally settling on a woman named Ms. Davies, who had a reputation for being both compassionate and utterly ruthless in the courtroom. I used what was left of my meager savings for the initial consultation. I laid out the entire story, presenting her with the copies of the 2 wills and Genevieve's meticulous notes. Ms. Davies listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she looked at the documents for a long time. "This is a compelling case," she said finally. "The forgery on the 2nd will is amateurish, and the fact that your great-aunt, the named executor of the 1st will, is willing to testify is huge. The challenge is the statute of limitations on fraud. However, given that this was concealed from you, we can argue that the clock didn't start until the moment of discovery. It will be a fight, but it's a fight I believe we can win." She then laid out the financial reality. A legal battle like this would be expensive. I told her about my financial situation. She nodded sympathetically. "Here's what we can do," she proposed. "We'll work on a contingency basis. I'll take a percentage of whatever we recover. That means I only get paid if you get paid. It also means I'm confident. We'll win." This was the lifeline I needed. With legal counsel secured, the next phase of the plan began, setting the stage. A direct confrontation needed an audience, but not a random one. It needed to be the very family members who had smiled for the camera in the Maldives, the ones who had benefited from my mother and sister's generosity funded by my stolen inheritance. My opportunity came in an unexpected form. My mother, in a grand gesture of false magnanimity, called me. "Olivia, honey, I know we haven't had a chance to properly catch up since we got back," she began, her voice oozing synthetic sweetness. "And I feel just awful that you had to be alone for Christmas. To make it up to you, Isabel and I want to host a big, welcome home family brunch at our house. We'd love for you to be the guest of honor." Guest of honor. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They wanted to parade me around, show everyone that all was forgiven, that I was happily back in my designated box. They wanted to publicly absolve themselves of their guilt. It was the perfect trap, and they were handing it to me on a silver platter. "Oh, Mom, that's so thoughtful of you," I said, injecting as much warmth into my voice as I could muster. "I'd love that. I've really missed everyone." I could almost hear her sigh of relief through the phone. Olivia was going to be compliant. Olivia was going to make this easy for them. "Wonderful," she chirped. "It's this Sunday, everyone is coming." Perfect. My next call was to Aunt Genevieve. "I need you to come into town on Sunday," I told her, "and I need you to bring the folder." There was a pause and then a determined, "I'll be there." The days leading up to the brunch were a whirlwind of preparation. I worked with Ms. Davies' office to prepare a formal letter of intent to sue, detailing our claims of fraud, forgery, and tortious interference with inheritance. It was a legally terrifying document, and we had it notarized and ready. I also did some digging on my own. Using public property records, I traced the timeline of my sister's home purchase. She and her husband had bought their massive house just 8 months after my grandfather died, with a down payment that would have been impossible on their salaries at the time. I found my mother's cruise itineraries through a travel blog she occasionally posted on. The frequency and luxury of her trips had increased dramatically in the past decade. It was all circumstantial, but it painted a damning picture. The final piece of my plan was emotional. I needed to be calm, collected, and in control. I spent Saturday practicing what I was going to say, standing in front of my mirror. I recited the facts, stripped them of emotion, and polished them until they were sharp, undeniable weapons. I would not cry. I would not scream. I would present the truth as a simple, unavoidable conclusion. My sister, the marketing manager, was about to be faced with the most catastrophic rebranding of her life. My mother, the retired nurse, was about to have her carefully constructed image of a loving matriarch surgically excised. On Sunday morning, I got dressed. I didn't choose an outfit of mourning or anger. I chose a simple, elegant blue dress, my grandfather's favorite color on me. It was a quiet tribute, a suit of armor only I could recognize. Aunt Genevieve arrived at my apartment an hour before we were due to leave. She looked nervous but resolute, the leather folder clutched in her hands like a sacred text. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her sharp eyes searching my face. I took a deep breath and looked at the determined woman in the mirror. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was no longer the dominant feeling. It had been overshadowed by a sense of purpose, a feeling of righteous clarity. I was no longer the victim of this story. I was the architect of its conclusion. I said, my voice steady. "Let's go give them a brunch they'll never forget." Isabel's house was exactly as I'd imagined it from her social media posts. A sprawling, two-story modern colonial with a manicured lawn and a three-car garage. It screamed new money, a fact that now felt like a personal insult. As Aunt Genevieve and I walked up the stone pathway, I felt a tremor of anxiety, but I pushed it down, replacing it with the cold, hard resolve I had been cultivating for weeks. The moment we walked through the door, the performance began. My mother, Alina, rushed over, her face a mask of delighted surprise. "Olivia, you're here, and Genevieve, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you." Her eyes darted nervously between me and the old woman she hadn't seen in over a decade. "Hello, Alina," Genevieve said, her voice calm and even. "Olivia invited me. I hope that's not a problem." No, of course not," my mother stammered, recovering quickly. "The more the merrier." Isabel appeared from the kitchen, a tray of mimosas in her hand. She was dressed in expensive-looking loungewear, the picture of effortless hosting. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw Genevieve, but she too was a professional. "Aunt Genevieve, it's been a long time." She turned her bright, false smile on me. "Livy, so glad you could make it. We were just about to show everyone the vacation slideshow." It was almost too perfect. The entire family, aunts, uncles, cousins, was gathered in the cavernous open-plan living room, sipping drinks and nibbling on appetizers. They all greeted me with varying degrees of awkward enthusiasm, the unspoken guilt of their Maldivian adventure hanging in the air. I played my part, smiling, accepting their hugs, and telling them how rested they all looked. We sat through 20 minutes of a painfully tone-deaf slideshow. Photos of their smiling faces against turquoise waters and white sands flashed across a giant television screen mounted over a fireplace. Each image was a fresh jab, but I kept my expression neutral, a serene smile plastered on my face. Finally, Isabel clapped her hands together. "All right, everyone, brunch is served." As everyone began to move towards the lavish buffet spread out on the dining room table, I cleared my throat. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, "before we eat, I'd like to propose a toast." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. Isabel and Alina exchanged a quick, uncertain glance. This was not part of their script. I picked up my glass of orange juice. "I'd like to make a toast," I repeated, my voice steady and clear, "to family, and to the legacies they leave behind." I looked directly at my mother. "And specifically, I'd like to toast to my grandfather." A few people murmured in agreement, raising their glasses. My mother's smile looked strained. "Grandpa was a wonderful man," I continued, letting my gaze sweep across the room, making eye contact with each of my family members. "He was kind, generous, and wise. He always wanted the best for his family, and he planned carefully to make sure we were all taken care of, especially me." The air in the room grew thick with tension. Isabel's smile vanished completely. "It's funny how things work out," I said, taking a deliberate step towards the television where their vacation photos were still paused on a shot of the whole family grinning. "For the last 10 years, I believed that Grandpa didn't have much to leave behind. I was told his estate was mostly debts. I was so grateful for the $5,000 I received, a sum I was told was a special gift he'd set aside just for me." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "But I recently learned that isn't the truth. The truth is, Grandpa left a very detailed will. A will that his own sister, my great-aunt Genevieve, was the executor of. I nodded towards Genevieve, who stood quietly by the door, the leather folder now in her hands. Every head in the room swiveled towards her. Eleanor spoke up, her voice sharp with panic. "Olivia, what is the meaning of this? This is hardly the time or the place." "I think this is the perfect time and place," I interrupted, my voice unwavering. "This beautiful house, the amazing vacations, it's important to know where blessings like these come from. Aunt Genevieve, would you mind?" Genevieve stepped forward and opened the folder. "This," she announced to the silent room, "is a copy of my brother's final will, signed and witnessed 6 months before his death." My mother's face went pale. Isabel looked like she was going to be sick. "In this will," I said, taking over as Genevieve held it up, "Grandpa left specific, modest sums to his daughter, Eleanor, and his granddaughter, Isabel. But the bulk of his estate, an investment portfolio worth, at the time, nearly $500,000, he left to me." A collective gasp went through the room. My uncles and aunts stared, mouths agape, first at me, then at my mother and sister. "Unfortunately," I went on, my voice dripping with ice, "that will was never submitted to probate. Instead, my mother presented a different document. A one-page forgery with a shaky, fake signature, which conveniently left everything to her. She bullied a grieving and overwhelmed Aunt Genevieve into silence, cashed out the portfolio that was meant for my future, and for the last decade has been living off my inheritance." I turned to my sister. "And you, Isabel, that generous gift for your down payment? Where do you think that came from? You've been living in my house. All those family holidays you enjoyed on my dime for years. And then, the moment I couldn't afford it, you took the rest of my money and went to the Maldives without me, and you had the gall to post about the ones who matter most." "Well, you're right. My grandfather knew who mattered. He knew who to trust. And it wasn't you." The silence was absolute, broken only by my mother's ragged breathing. I placed my untouched glass on a nearby table. "I have retained legal counsel. A copy of the original will, along with Aunt Genevieve's testimony and evidence of forgery, has been filed. My lawyer will be in touch with you both tomorrow to discuss how you intend to pay back the full amount of my inheritance, adjusted for 10 years of market growth, plus damages." I looked around at the shocked faces of my family. "I'm sorry to have ruined your brunch," I said, my voice devoid of any real apology. "Please enjoy the food. After all, I paid for it." And with that, I turned to Aunt Genevieve. "Are you ready to go?" She nodded, a small, triumphant smile on her face. We walked out of the house, leaving behind the wreckage of a family built on lies, the stunned silence of our relatives, and the quiet, satisfying hum of justice finally served. The aftermath of what my cousins later dubbed the brunch bomb was swift and chaotic. My phone buzzed with texts and missed calls for days, but I answered none of them. I let my lawyer, Ms. Davies, handle all communication with my mother and sister. Their initial response, as predicted, was blustering denial and accusations. Isabel's husband, a man whose entire personality seemed to be golf, called me and threatened a countersuit for defamation. I calmly told him to have his lawyer speak to mine and hung up. But their position was untenable. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the original will, Genevieve's unwavering testimony, and the expert analysis confirming the forged signature, their defenses crumbled. Ms. Davies was relentless. She made it clear that if this went to court, they wouldn't just be facing a civil suit for the money. They would be facing criminal charges for fraud and forgery. The threat of public humiliation and potential jail time was the final nail in the coffin of their arrogance. They settled. It took several tense weeks of negotiation, but they agreed to pay back the principal inheritance, plus a negotiated amount for a decade of market growth. It wasn't the full, optimistic number Ms. Davies had initially calculated. They had, after all, spent a good portion of it, but it was a substantial, life-altering sum. To pay it, Isabel and her husband had to sell their massive house and downsize significantly. My mother had to cash out her retirement accounts and sell off most of her assets. Their comfortable lives, built on a foundation of my stolen future, were dismantled piece by piece. The financial blow was devastating for them, but more importantly, the reputational one was absolute. The news ripped through our extended family. Some, beholden to my mother's influence for years, tried to preach forgiveness. "She's still your mother," one aunt told me over the phone. "Yes," I replied calmly, "and she stole from me for 10 years. The title of mother doesn't grant immunity from consequences." Most, however, were appalled. They had been unwitting participants in a decade-long lie, and they were furious. The family, which had once seemed like a monolithic entity, fractured completely. The annual holidays I once hosted ceased to exist. There was no longer a center to hold them. My own life began to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. The settlement money arrived in my account, a number so large it felt unreal. The first thing I did was pay off all my debts. The sense of relief was so profound it brought me to tears. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living on the edge of financial anxiety. The constant, low-grade hum of panic that had been my companion for years simply vanished. I didn't quit my job. In fact, freed from the desperation of chasing any low-paying gig to make rent, I found a new love for my work. I started my own boutique design agency, focusing on clients and projects I was passionate about. I could afford to take creative risks to build something that was truly mine. But the biggest change was my relationship with Aunt Genevieve. She became the anchor of my new life. We spoke on the phone every day and saw each other most weekends. She was more of a mother to me than Alina had ever been. We discovered a shared love for gardening, history, and quiet afternoons spent reading. In her, I found the unconditional love and support I had craved my entire life. She wasn't just my ally, she was my family. One afternoon, sitting in her book-filled living room, I told her my idea. "I want to use some of the money to honor Grandpa," I said. "He wanted me to have security, but I think he'd also want me to do some good with it." Together, we established a small foundation in his name, the Thomas Grant Foundation for Young Artists. We created a scholarship to help promising young graphic designers from low-income backgrounds pay for their education and get their careers started. It was a way to turn the greed and deception that had marked the last decade into something positive, something thaw. T would create opportunities for others. It was a legacy my grandfather would have been proud of. I never saw my mother or sister again. Ms. Davies informed me that Isabel and her family moved to a different state. My mother went to live with a cousin several hours away, her social standing in her community destroyed. I have no doubt that they painted themselves as the victims in their new lives, but I didn't care. Their story no longer had any power over me. I had taken back the narrative. My life today is quiet, peaceful, and full. I have a thriving business, a home I love, and a small but fiercely loyal circle of friends. My family is no longer defined by blood, but by choice. It's me and Genevieve, the board members of our foundation, and the friends who stood by me. We have our own traditions now, our own holidays. They aren't lavish or performative. They are small, genuine gatherings filled with laughter and real affection. Sometimes, when I'm working in the garden, I feel my grandfather's presence. I feel his pride, his love, and his relief. The future he planned for me was delayed, but it was not denied. My mother and sister stole my money, but they could never steal my spirit. I built a new life, not on the ashes of my old one, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of truth. And that is a different kind of wealth, one that can never be taken away.